有课，下午12点半有课。
啊，对。阿布达比要是你们没去过呢，你有时间的话，去前或之后待一天，其实也有几个地方景点很值得去的，因为它有一个类似法国的那个museum，还有一个很大的海洋水族馆，我去过，很 impressive，非常棒的啊。
然后一个游乐园，一个海洋馆。
对对对，所以你们上网看一下，它有好几个，大概7、8个，真的非常棒的那个 attraction，值得去的啊。
好的，女同学还有很多很想 shopping。
等那个 professor 还没来之前，我们先说一些shopping 的事情。但是你们要专心工作啊，学习东西。那这样吧，我自己觉得呢，这个真的是一个很好的机会，你可以到 CNN，还有跟其他国家的那些 master 的学生一起学习啊。所以首先要集中去上课啊。可以给你们一个心理准备，很忙很忙的。去年他们有一些同学是没时间睡觉的啊，但是你
睡觉都
要明白，
没时间嘛。
那因为你要明白，因为每天都有 assignment，你们必须要在那个 deadline 之前交功课。到最后有一个大的 project 的 assignment，所以去年有好几个同学你们都没有睡觉，结果他们又赢了一些奖回来，所以我觉得对人生的那个 experience 挺好的。那待会呢，我听到有一些很吵的地方，待会开始的时候，可能你们要 put on mute 啊。那我还是很鼓励，比如说讲的过程呢，你们有什么问题，比较主动的问，或者是表达自己的意见，就不要害羞，因为你们是学习嘛，不明白就应该去问。
好，
因为你们有一些组是有几个人，应该大概现在是20多个同学已经进来了啊。Okay, I can see that our tutor, Luke Henderson, on the call.
Hi, Kimmy. How's it going?
Hello, I'm just checking with the students, and they just finished some class this morning, and some of them left Hong Kong and returned to Shenzhen, and then they grouped together to attend the e-learning, which
Oh,
is
okay.
good. Yeah,
Excellent.
and
Well,
everybody
welcome,
is
guys.
very excited. Yeah.
Yeah, no, we've got an exciting week in Abu Dhabi ahead of us. I'll give it a couple moments for
Yeah,
others to
yeah,
join.
yeah.
But yeah, we've got a lot in store for you guys today.
Hey, look, maybe later on you speak a little bit slowly. Make sure that everyone can catch you and understand.
Certainly. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Hello, everyone.
Hi there.
I just briefed them the simulation program in Abu Dhabi last year, and then the last day will be a bit busy, and a few of the students couldn't even go to sleep.
True.
And before we start, 各位同学，要是你们有什么问题有关阿布达比，也可以问 Luke 啊。Because I just asked them to put on mute. 我们还需要等多2分钟，4点钟，因为可能有些同学4点钟打进来嘛。
Hey, Eric.
Hello, Eric.
Hey, Luke.
Hello, hello.
Thanks for leading the session.
No, my pleasure. I'll just briefly introduce you at the beginning, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Great.
Just for your information, a few of the students they group themselves into like 4 or 5 person and then dial in. So I think now we have like some 30, 35 or almost 40.
Yeah, I saw the list. That's great. Yeah, so they'll all be in one cohort, but yeah, grouped into those particular groups. Good morning, all. We'll just give it a couple more minutes. We'll give it a couple more minutes for others to join, and then we will get going today.
Yeah. I think we can almost start because some of them are in the groups, so we are more than 40 at the moment.
Great. Well, welcome everyone to this first pre-simulation training. This will be a number of sessions that we will be running over these next couple of days. And I'm delighted to see you all on this call this morning. My name is Luke Henderson, and I'm a senior trainer with the CNN Academy. I've been with CNN for around about 25 years now. Oh, sorry, 15 years. 25 years in my career, 15 years at CNN. I was previously at Sky News, where I joined them in 2000, and worked my way up through them through various different roles. I was actually in the control room at Sky News in London for the 9/11 attacks in New York. I was dispatched to Thailand to cover the Asian tsunami a couple of years later. And then I moved to CNN in 2009, first working out of the London bureau. And from then, really, I moved to Atlanta in 2016, where I became a supervising producer, which essentially meant I was the most senior editorial person in the control room, overseeing all breaking news. First up on weekend overnights, so a lot of Asian news coming out of that, particularly out of Hong Kong, and also North Korea as well. And then I moved to dayside supervising, where I oversaw shows such as Connect the World with Becky Anderson, Amanpour with Christian Amanpour, and also Quest Means Business with Richard Quest. I moved back to the UK in December 22, where I started work with the CNN Academy. I'm going to talk to you a little more about the CNN Academy today, and particularly the simulation upcoming in just a couple of weeks. What to expect in Abu Dhabi. And then we'll be discussing 2 subjects today, the art of storytelling, and also we will be discussing digital storytelling as well. So first up, I'm going to share my screen with you. Just make sure everyone can hear it. Great. So This, as I say, is your first session of pre-simulation training. Today, as I mentioned, we'll do a brief intro now. We'll then talk about art of storytelling, and then we'll be follow that up with digital storytelling. We're going to run this session from 4 o'clock now through till 8 o'clock your time. We're going to follow it up with a session tomorrow morning at this, well, morning my time, afternoon your time. So from 3 p.m. your time
2楼了，
through
书包
till
没拿
8 p.m.
我书包在楼上没拿，那学生证。
I need to mute
好
someone.
好的，谢谢。
Okay, could everyone mute themselves, please?
各位同学，麻烦你把那个你们的computer put on mute 静音 ，sorry。
Sure, everyone is muted. Okay, so as I was saying, tomorrow's session will be with my colleague, Glenn McCaughey. Glenn McCaughey is a mobile journalism trainer, has trained newsrooms and students from around the world. He'll be leading you on a session tomorrow at the slightly earlier time of 3 o'clock in the afternoon on mobile journalism. So essentially, how to use your mobile phones, your cell phones, to both shoot and edit professional looking video. And these are skills that you will use when you get to Abu Dhabi. The final session of pre-simulation training will be this coming Tuesday, again from 4 o'clock in the afternoon through till 8 o'clock, where I'll be back with you to cover ethics in journalism, breaking news, and open source intelligence. Just a few house rules before we start. Please join all the sessions on time. Please have your videos on throughout the sessions and your microphones on mute throughout. So please, if you haven't got your video turned on at the moment, please turn it on and leave it on for the duration of this session, unless, of course, your internet connection doesn't allow you to do so. But it's a lot better for me and Glenn and everyone else if we see more than just a sea of black boxes. So please turn your videos on. It would just help with the interaction throughout these sessions. And when you're not speaking, please have your microphone on mute. Make sure your workspace is quiet so you can hear what I'm saying. Check your Wi-Fi setup ahead of time so that you're not suffering during the session. And there are two ways to ask questions. Firstly, you can just put your hand up on Zoom. So press the hand button on Zoom and I will see that and come to you. You can also put questions in the chat box. And what I'm going to do is, Eric, if you're able to monitor those chats for me as we go through these sessions and just flag anything in there, particularly if it's not in English. So again, two ways to ask questions or answer questions is to put your hand up on Zoom or to put your answer in the chat box. I will try as much as humanly possible to talk slowly during these sessions. We do have a translation feature on Zoom that you can enable at the bottom of the screen along the Zoom bar, where Zoom will translate what I'm saying into Chinese. If you so desire, you can do that. We will record these sessions, and I'm just going to start the record now, and post them online. So if there's anything, there we go.
Recording
if there's
in
anything
progress.
you want to recap at a later date, you can go back and watch the video, and I will share the link for those videos with your tutors. So before we get going, let's first of all discuss the upcoming simulation, which I think many of you will be attending in Abu Dhabi in just a couple of weeks' time. We get going on the 10th of December and we go all the way through to the 17th of December. And I'm going to give you a flavor of what that week will look like. But first up, I wanted to show you what last year's simulation looked like. And last year's simulation, we ran again in Abu Dhabi around about the same time of year. This one had a climate change theme as COP28 was taking place down the road in Dubai. And actually, we took all of our students to COP28 for one day just to see how the conference unfolds, where it's set, and also they got to attend a real press conference as well. So the theme was climate change, and this is how the week unfolded.
Welcome to the 2023 CNN Academy Climate Storytelling Simulation.
We learned a lot, just a lot of new skills. A lot of us were pushed out of our comfort zone, out of the usual general style of journalism that we usually do.
Since we came from day one, we've been exposed to different ways of doing our paper drafts, and we've attended a few workshops and conferences, things that I've never done before because I'm not from a media background. So going to a real press conference and sitting there and listening to people interview and talk was something really new for me.
I feel so glad here because there's so amazing courses here and there are so many excellent teachers and classmates. I'm really excited and I feel my professional level improves really rapidly.
What I've learned most from this week is how to be a responsible journalist, that stories have power, and we always need to make sure what we're sharing is true.
I think it's also fun to having everyone here working on the same thing all together, and we are sharing each other what we are doing and what we are thinking about, and we are asking questions to each other how do we make the story better. For me, that is the best part of the simulation.
Has been my best week. Everyone is in characters and roles.
What I've learned this week is that teamwork is key and communication is really important. And what's been really challenging is just deciphering all of the information and finding out the truth and not going after red herrings.
Teams have arrived to the National Mangrove Park of Rhinania. Now they're gathering material, they're interviewing role players.
We're still trying to figure out who we're going to interview. We're waiting in a few lines.
It's too hot. Every day is too hot. We have to sit here to avoid the heat.
How is the government going to navigate this crisis?
Dalal Awinat, GNN News Blue 5, Rhinania National Mangrove.
During simulation week, we have thrown an awful lot of distractions at our students, and I'm absolutely delighted to say that they've been able to disregard those distractions and focus on the story at hand and drive compelling elements through their storytelling, which makes their stories resonate on a global stage. And that is what makes this cohort successful.
Okay. So that was the CNN Academy 2023 simulation. As I say, it had a climate change theme. And really, that gives you a sort of a flavor of what the simulation is. But to put it in a nutshell, essentially, when you reach Abu Dhabi, you are going to be plunged into a fictional country. It's called Brinania, and it's formed a part of all of our simulations so far. So it's not a real place. This is a fictional country called Brinania. Once you are there, you're going to be split up into cohorts, and within those cohorts will be a series of groups of 5 students. You're then going to be given an assignment, and that assignment will be a breaking news story that is currently happening in Brinania. Other than that, I can't give you any more details about the story itself, as a lot of what happens during simulation week will unfold during the week. We know what's going to happen, but you guys won't. And it will be up to you to deal with everything that happens along the way in order to form the basis for your stories, which each group will submit at the end of the week. But just to give you a sense of what you'll see and do whilst you're in Abu Dhabi, it's worth turning again to what we did last year. So our students there attended a series of press conferences with role players and scrums, which they were able to ask questions of the people there. And there were, there are various press conferences depending on how the story develops. They were also set up with a series of interviews, again, with people, with role players, where they were able to ask questions to those people to try and further their knowledge, pardon me, of the unfolding story. Last year, there were 200 plus possible story angles to pursue. We also have a dedicated social media platform, which all of you guys will be given access to. On there, you'll find a series of updating tweets, and you'll be able to tweet back as well. Last year, we had 110 participants working in teams. 34 different nationalities were represented from across the world. This year, it's going to be even bigger. We're looking at around about 150 students. This year, we've got students coming from America. We've also got students coming from, pardon me, our Dublin course, and those students are very international as well. We've got students there from India, from Tunisia, from South Africa, Indonesia. So various countries are represented on our Dublin course. We've got students coming from our Abu Dhabi course. Again, a whole series of nationalities represented there. Students from our course in Kuala Lumpur, in Malaysia, and also a cohort from Iraq as well. So as you can see, it's going to be a real mix of nationalities. And within your groups, you'll be either working alongside them or against them as you compete to uncover this unfolding story. At the end of the week, in your teams, you'll be asked to produce a video report shot and edited on your phone. That's why we're running the session with Glenn tomorrow. We then will judge those pieces and we'll select a winner and a couple of runner-ups, and we'll have a closing ceremony and an awards ceremony. This, and I appreciate for some of you, this is going to look quite small, but I will send this out as a PDF, so you'll have your own versions of it. But this is essentially how the week will play out. Students will arrive on December 9th and 10th, and later in the day, on the 10th, there'll be an opening ceremony, and also we'll split you up into groups. So you'll get to know your teammates on the first day. On the second day, on Wednesday, December the 11th, it will kick off with an introduction from Becky Anderson. She's our bureau manager and also anchor of Connect the World in Abu Dhabi. You'll then be set your assignment. So you'll then start to understand what's unfolding. There'll be a series of team, pardon me, there'll be a series of team meetings through the morning, and then in the afternoon, your first press conference. What's that going to be about? I can't tell you. You are going to find out as the day progresses. On the following day, which will be Thursday, December the 12th, you will be grouped into cohorts. So we're going to have 4 cohorts: red, blue, yellow, and green. You will discover which cohort you are in, and that will determine whether you are either attending interviews or in lecture 1 or in workshop 1. So basically all the cohorts will rotate through those 4 things as the day progresses. So you either be in interviews, lectures, or workshops. On the Friday, December the 13th, we're going to take a trip. I can't tell you where yet, but this will be a field trip where you will go to a location in Abu Dhabi and news gather on your story. There'll be people there for you to interview. Various other things will happen while you are there. And again, we'll split you up into those 4 cohorts, and you'll all attend that field trip at different times. Again, on the Saturday, December the 14th, another set of interviews, another set of lectures and workshops, which you will attend in your cohorts. And who knows what else might happen that day. You have to expect the unexpected through this. When we come to the Sunday and the Monday, you will work in your teams on your final reports. We will be there, myself, Glenn, who you'll meet tomorrow, Ali Reza, who's the director of the CNN Academy, and will be running this year's simulation in Abu Dhabi, will be available as well to talk with you and advise on your paper edits as you start to prepare your reports. On the 16th, there is a strict deadline of 12 o'clock for all groups to hand in their reports. I can tell you that some of the groups last year worked through the night on those reports to get them there on time. There'll then be a student activity in the afternoon. And then finally, on the last day, December 17th, we'll kick off with an awards ceremony and then a series of debrief sessions where you can feed back to us what you liked about the simulation, what you didn't like about the simulation. So it's really helpful for us, but crucially, we will give you guys feedback as well, based on how you interacted through the week and the work that was produced at the end. The best way to see this week is this is your chance to be dispatched to a foreign country to report on a breaking news story. It doesn't matter if you make mistakes. We almost want you to make mistakes because this is a safe to fail environment. It doesn't matter if you make mistakes. This is where you learn how to deal with all these things that we're going to put in front of you over the week. How to deal with a press conference, how to deal with an interviewee, perhaps a difficult interviewee, one that isn't willing to play ball with you. How do you deal with that? How do you interact with social media? How do you news gather using social media? All of these things you are going to learn through the week. So if you make a mistake, don't worry. It's not going to penalize you. And it's much better to make that mistake in something like this than in your first job. That's a lot harder to recover from. So use this week to really learn how to master all of these skills, and you will get the best out of it. Now, as I mentioned, this is in Abu Dhabi. I don't know how many of you have been to Abu Dhabi before, but I wanted just to give you some information about it. There is plenty to see in Abu Dhabi, including the mosque, the Louvre, and various palaces as well. CNN and the training area, where you'll spend most of your time, are situated on Yas Island. That's probably where your hotels are as well. And Yas Island is a whole destination in itself. Features attractions such as Ferrari World, Warner Brothers World, and SeaWorld. So plenty to see and do right on your doorstep. It might be December, it might be winter, but in Abu Dhabi, it's always warm. And the weather will be around the mid-20s in degrees Celsius. So bring appropriate clothing for that sort of climate. This is a Muslim country, so please read up before you come, just to see the various behaviors that will be expected of you whilst you are there in Abu Dhabi. You should always wear clothing that covers your shoulders and knees. Avoid any tight-fitting or revealing clothing, particularly during the training sessions and when you're out and about in Abu Dhabi. This map shows you the lay of the land on Yas Island. You can see the Yas Creative Hub here. This is where we will be based for the week, where most of the events and the training will take place. You can see a couple of the other hotels on this map as well. They're not all listed here. So if you don't see your hotel, don't worry. But as you can see, we're almost walking distance from some of the main attractions. This isn't a particularly big area. It's very easy to get around. So that's the simulation. And before we move on, I wanted to introduce you to Eric Chung. Eric Chung is a field producer with us, has been with CNN for quite some time now. And he will be working very, very closely with you when you hit the ground running in Abu Dhabi. So he will be working very closely with your particular cohort. And I wanted to introduce Eric. As I say, he's a field producer. He's based in Taiwan, mainly working with Will Ripley, I'm going to assume. But Eric, if you want to take it away and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Luke. So my name is Eric, and I've been working as a field producer of CNN for a couple of years, and this is my 7th year with the company. I started my career in Hong Kong, where our Asia Pacific hub is located, and now I've relocated to the Taipei bureau. And as Luke said, you know, I will be there in Abu Dhabi to assist you guys as well. So, you know, looking forward to meeting all of you, and I also speak Chinese. So if you need any help, understand anything, or, you know, or if you just like to ask some questions in Chinese, please feel free to reach out to me. So yeah, I'll see you there next month.
Great. And you'll meet Eric when you arrive in Abu Dhabi. So that's really an introduction into that week and what will take place in the week. Before we move on, does anyone have any questions about that week that you'd like to ask? If so, please just pop up your hand.
让我再回什么嘛？有一个小妹妹让我看看她爸体检报告。我靠，52岁的叔叔怎么比我爸的那个问题还多？哦 ，sorry.
Eric. Sorry, was that a question?
Sorry, 其他同学有没有什么问题有关去阿布达比的？那现在可以提问。你要是问中文也行 ，Eric 帮你翻译。Sorry, look, I just speak in 普通话 and make sure everyone understand and any questions from them. Okay, seems not. Then we move to the next section.
Okay, great. We will move on. Just bear with me 1 second. I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, so the first subject we're going to talk about this morning, I'm going to keep saying this morning, so please mind me. I know it's the afternoon there, it's my morning here. It's around about just coming up to 8:30 here. So the first session we're going to discuss is the art of storytelling. And this is really the backbone of everything we do at CNN. We are storytellers. As journalists, that's what we do on a daily basis. We tell stories. So with that in mind, what is the role of a storyteller? Well, as David Culver puts it here, used to be based in China, I think that my role is not only to uncover stories, but cover breaking news as it's happening, but also find those relatable aspects where people can connect to another person. And that's a really, really crucial thing of what we're doing as storytellers, making our stories relatable to other people. There are people in this industry that will talk about human interest stories, you know, the soft stories about cute kids or pets that we might find at the end of a news broadcast, just, you know, to make things a little bit lighter after all the doom and gloom. But actually, when you think about it, it's a strange idea, because really any kind of news story can and should be a human interest story. It should be a story that is of interest to humans, because otherwise, why would you watch it? If you, as a journalist, are not making your story about human beings, then you are missing out on the main reason why anyone watches the news or watches a movie or reads a novel, for that matter. As David Culver says, people want to connect with others. And to do that, journalists have to find ways to turn facts and information into relatable stories. So, with that in mind, what do you guys think makes a good story? I'm going to give you the first one, just to get you a sense of what I'm looking for here. But what makes a good story? And it's a fairly obvious first one, because this is the job that we're in. As we always say, it's teach me something I don't know. Tell me something I don't know. That should be the job of any journalist. People don't want to read or learn about things they already know. They're busy people. They haven't got time for that. They want to learn something new. So a good story should always teach you something new. What else do you guys think makes a good story? Feel free to put up your hand or put it in the chat box. If you want to say it in Chinese, then I'm sure Eric can translate as well. But what do you guys think makes a good story? Christian, what do you think?
Yes, thanks. You've kind of said it before. It should be relatable to my life or lives of people close to me.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, it's really, really important to make your story relatable. You know, people should find a way to make it relevant to their own lives. Why do I care about this thing that is happening thousands of miles away in a different country to someone that I've never met before? Well, what about if you made that relatable to them? And there's a number of different ways you can do that. The first is a very strong character where people listen to it and think, oh my God, she's a mother, she's got 3 kids. You know, how would I feel if I was in her footsteps? Or another way to do it is just make the subject relatable. So for instance, let's go back to when there was a shortage of grain because of you know, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. You know, a very simple way to make that relatable to an audience living all around the world is grain is a big part of what we put on our breakfast tables in the morning. You know, it's a big part of, certainly here in Europe, it's a big part of our morning breakfasts. So that's how you make it relatable. You know, if there's not a shortage of grain, your cereal and other products that use grain, that's going to go up in price. That immediately then affects you. You've made a story that's happening thousands of miles away relatable to you. What else do you think makes a good story? Again, just feel free to put up your hand or put it in the chat box. What do you think makes a good story? I'll give you another one while we're waiting, but keep them coming in. Mia, what do you think makes a good story?
I think it's a good story. It's something it's meaningful, and it will give us some enlighten us, and something like and some story is truthful and
Yeah.
meaningful.
Yeah, meaningful, truthful. I mean, accuracy is obviously right at the top of what we're trying to do here. And I'm seeing in the chat group here as well that, you know, a good story should impact a lot of people as well. Not all stories will, but that's your job to try and make it relatable and bring it back to an audience. I'll give you another one on my list here. Makes you think more deeply about something. Not every story is completely new to our audience, and yet part of what journalists need to do is to take stories already out there and explore them further. For every story already out there, there will often be angles that have not yet been explored, interests that have not yet been represented, backstories that have not yet been told. This might be as easy as breaking a brand new story, but journalists are not always in that position. Follow-up stories will always make up more than half of the work of any journalist. I mean, you think about what's going on right now in the Middle East with Israel and Gaza and Lebanon. You know, that's an ongoing conflict. And it's the job of the journalists reporting it to find new angles, to make that story relevant, and to keep that story, keep the coverage of it going. You know, obviously we can tell the latest developments of what's going on there, but to keep audiences reading and listening and watching about that conflict, we need to find new ways to hit that story. And that, as I say, is what makes up the work of 50% of the work of most journalists. Makes you curious about something. So, you know, you might well be aware of a story, but not really cared or thought much about it. Maybe a good story makes you more curious about it. This is a high bar. It's a lot to ask. People often don't do U-turns in their opinions that often. But it is sometimes possible to tell stories that complicate people's assumptions, that prompt them to see something familiar in a new way. This, actually, I see Felix, you put this in here, and this kind of works to this. Emotionally connected and or appealing. Yeah, makes you feel connected to something. It's a huge world. There's 7 billion people out there, each with their own story to tell. We have already mentioned that stories need to tell audiences something new, but there is also an important sense in which a good story tells us something familiar. The key to this is telling something universal that adds some new information, and yet part of a good story can often bring out a universal theme in a novel context. And yes, again, to what Felix says, it moves you emotionally. We like to think of journalism as being about the facts, and that's obviously true, but it's not the whole truth. Good storytelling makes us feel something. Think of any news story that you have seen this week. What emotions did it leave you with? Scared? It's true. A lot of the news does make us worry about the way the world's going. But that's why journalists are often on the lookout for stories that offer something different on an emotional level. As a producer, there's a lot of doom and gloom in the world. But that's why sometimes you just need to balance it with something good that's going on. And this is a big part of when we tell climate change stories. That can be a lot of doom and gloom, but it's also important to reflect what people are doing about it. You know, the people that are taking on the challenge, perhaps single-handedly, and trying to change what's happening to our planet. There are stories out there. If sometimes a journalist struggles to find stories, it's not because there's a shortage of them. More likely, the journalist who's looking at the world around them can see the stories, but is struggling to find a way to tell that story in a way that's going to be compelling to their audiences. So, we've talked so far about what makes a good story, but let's hone in on TV for a moment, on video stories, and actually not just TV, digital as well. What do you think makes a good video story? What do you guys think? Again, feel free to put up your hand or put it in the chat box. But what do you think makes a good video story? If you were watching a video story, what would make you continue to watch it? Visual impact. Yeah. Strong images. Not every piece has to be a video piece. And as multimedia journalists, you have so many options on how to present your story these days. Video is just one of them. You could do a digital write. You could do a podcast. You could do a photo gallery. You could do an explainer piece. You have so many options available to you now as to how to tell your stories. So it's important that the video stories that you tell have strong images. There needs to be a point to them being a good video story. And Christian, you're 100% right. Sound too. It's very, very easy as a journalist to forget about the sound when you're putting your story together. I'm sorry to say this, people don't tune in generally to hear you, the journalist, speaking. Your job as a journalist is to sprinkle bits of script in around your elements that you have in the piece. Your elements are key. Your job as a journalist is just to sprinkle script between them. Facts. Helping people understand people's stories. So sound is crucial. If there's natural sound, good, strong natural sound, then sometimes that can be as powerful as strong images. Yeah, a good storyline, of course. Strong narrative, crucial. An engaging narrative. You might have strong visuals, but if the narrative isn't strong, then you don't have a good video story. And crucially, compelling interviews. A lot of times, if you don't have the first, strong images, sometimes a compelling interview can make up for that because your interviewee is so compelling that they can tell that story on their own and crucially can help the audience relate to that story by the audience putting them in their footsteps. So let's talk for a moment now about the characteristics of a good storyteller. I've got a picture of Nema Elbegir on the screen. She's one of our main correspondents at CNN, and certainly someone I would consider to be a good storyteller. Informed. These are all the things that you really need to be aiming for as a good storyteller. It's a good place to start. As a journalist, knowing about your topic. It's often said to aspiring novelists, write what you know. That's necessary for journalists too, but certainly not sufficient. Lots of well-informed people would not make good journalists. So you need to be curious. If you weren't curious, you wouldn't be a journalist. But curiosity is something that you have to maintain. It's a real danger for journalists to think that they know when really there is more to know. And there may be different sides to a story that you haven't heard before. You also have to be engaged and engaging. This is about conveying that a story matters. Audiences won't engage with a story that doesn't matter to them. So as a storyteller, the story has to matter to you first and foremost. If you don't care about what you're writing or saying or reporting, it's going to be pretty hard to get your audience to care too. So you need to be passionate and demonstrate that a story makes you passionate. Authority is crucial. These days, the authority of journalists is being challenged all the time. You have to be confident enough in your work to be able to stand by every aspect of your story. You don't know in advance where your work is going to be questioned, especially when it is being challenged. And a lot of times that happens in online debates. Part of maintaining authority is to be accountable and demonstrate that you can back up your story when you need to, but sometimes also be willing to acknowledge that you've made mistakes. And that leads us on to the issue of trust. If you're working for an established news organization, there's already that bank of trust that's been built up. Your audience trusts you because you represent that organization and you represent journalism itself. So trust is something that you use when you're telling a story, but it's also something that you can easily lose through silly mistakes. So it's important to keep journalistic ethics in mind at every step. If an audience doesn't trust you, they're not going to listen to you. And it's the same for your organization. If your organization has lost the trust of its audience, they won't listen or trust you either. So trust is absolutely crucial. Let's talk now about the responsibility to the audience. What do you guys think? As a journalist, you are a representative of the audience, and that means you have a responsibility. So what do you think those responsibilities are to your audience? What do you guys think? What should a good journalist be to their audience? What do they need to be good at? I'll give you the first one, a communicator. A failure to engage the audience and keep them interested. If you lose your audience's engagement, they will miss out on the value of knowing the whole story. You could say that this is the most fundamental aspect of the art of storytelling. What's the point of telling a story that no one follows until the end? What else do you think you need to be good at to be a good journalist? Again, just pop up your hand or pop it in the chat group. I'll give you another. You have to be a good source of information. There's always the possibility of misleading your audience, losing their trust, losing your credibility. It can be very tempting to let telling a compelling story override the imperative to be a reliable source of information. It is never legitimate to sacrifice the accuracy of information to tell a more compelling story. You always have to remember that you are a witness to what is unfolding around you. So what does it feel like to be there? There is more to storytelling than just information. There's also the feeling of being there. There's the emotion of the people involved. Your audience does not have the opportunity to be there like you do. Understanding that is actually a privilege. To witness important news events is key to your responsibility as a journalist. So, what does it feel like to be there? What are you seeing with your own eyes? What are you hearing with your own ears? Is it scary? You know, are tensions heightened? What can you smell? All those senses need to come out in your reporting because you are the eyes and ears of your audience. A lot of times they can't be there. And crucially, let the story speak for itself. You're a reporter. You can't convey everything that you discover. You can't let your curiosity get the better of you and report everything that you see and hear. You have to let the story speak for itself. Let the main takeaways come through, not bury them in details. That said, digital journalism offers ways in which details and angles that may not make the cut in a written article may end up being key components in a video story or an explainer. And we'll talk about a bit more about that when we get to the digital storytelling section. Eric.
Hey, and adding to that, Luke, I also feel like giving context to a story is really important. So that's speaking from experience, because a lot of times our audience don't necessarily know, about the context of the story. They might only be hearing about it for the first time. And in order for them to be engaged and really understand what's going on, it is also our responsibility to be providing the crucial context for them to understand the history and the controversies surrounding a particular story, so they are better informed. So it sometimes for me it goes beyond just telling them what's happening on the ground right now. We also have to take a step back to explain to them why it matters.
Definitely. And again, that leads back to, why should I care about it? Why does it matter? Yeah, no, really good point, Eric. So we've talked about what makes a good story, what makes a good video story, and how you should act as a journalist. So how do you go about finding your story? How does a journalist find their next story? Where do you think you can find good stories from? What do you guys think? Again, just stick up your hand or put it in the chat group. Good. That's the first one. Read. Yes, exactly. Read, and read some more. Good journalist is about making connections. The world is a sea of information, and it's up to journalists to join the dots. That means a good journalist is always finding out more about what's going on around them. If you work for a general global news channel like CNN, you can always look to independent, specialized, niche news outlets for stories that perhaps deserve more mainstream attention. Think tanks and NGOs often produce reports that are full of facts and figures. Independent bloggers and activist groups are also places where journalists find their leads. So the basis for finding stories is always expanding your knowledge by reading widely. Mia, what do you think? How do you find a good story?
I think we need to find a good story through to observe the things happened around you and observe the people. We can just observe their conversation and their experience when we talk to them. So we know their habit and we know what happened to theirs. And say something. Just observe. And ask yourself some questions. For example, why these things happens, and if these things happen to others, what's the result of these things, or what it is connected to the social problems, something like that.
Yeah.
You need to have you have the angle to observe something.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I mean, I think what really what you're saying there is my next 2 points on this, and I see the same people, see people on the chat group are saying the same things as well. Talk to people. One of the pitfalls of being an avid reader is that it's often too easy for journalists to spend all of their time online. If you just stick to online sources, the chances are your work is not going to be that original. Which is why we need to talk to people to find the angles, information, and compelling characters that can bring new light to your story. If you have 50 contacts in your phone who you talk to about the region you cover or the subjects you're interested in or the community that you serve, try to double that number. I guarantee you that the more and the greater variety of people that you talk to on a daily basis, the more likely you are to hear something that no other journalist has heard before. Contacts and sources are absolutely key in journalism. I've not read them, but I've seen, for instance, our reporter, our correspondent, Nick Robertson's WhatsApp, and it is a sea of different topics and stories and all the different sources that he has nicely organized there, so that when anything happens, he can quickly go online and start speaking to people knowledgeable, both in those countries and on that topics. And that's sometimes how he gets his scoops as well. Lastly, on this one, asking questions. All your reading and day-to-day conversations are going to throw up questions. Make a note of every question that comes up for you. The answers to those questions could well be the starting point for your next major story. Seek out the people who might have answers to those questions. Some of them are going to be easy to find, like academics and researchers that might have knowledge that are only too happy to get out to a wider audience. Sometimes the people who know might not be so easy to find, especially when you're pursuing a hard-hitting story about a corporation or a politician. But think of the people you might know. Think of the people who might know those people and start asking questions. That's what journalists do. So just while you're going around your everyday lives, ask questions. You know, why is this there? Is there a story behind that? Why do we do what we do? Is there not a better way? You know, why is this person saying this thing? Always be asking questions. Eric, do you have anything to add to that about, I mean, you've obviously often trying to find a new story. Any other tips you'd add to that?
I think be really curious about a lot of things, and that's, you know, also related to your third point about asking lots of questions. You know, I think some of the best stories I have produced for CNN came from, you know, talking to different people and being curious about a lot of things. And, you know, one example, for example, you know, one story I did was an exclusive about how Russia, China, and the United States have all expanded their nuclear test sites over the last few years at an unprecedented scale in the last few decades. And that story was a scoop, and it came from talking to people during various conferences where I got access to defense experts, and also just being curious. You know, when some of those experts were showing me photos, satellite images of those nuclear test sites, and you see various things going on there. You know, if you're curious and you ask questions about, you know, what those facilities are for, and you know, and whether, you know, that happened at an unprecedented scale, you know, just you know, talking to them, gathering ideas, you know, finding out, being curious about, you know, what you're presented, then, you know, there is a greater likelihood that you'll be able to really uncover something that others might not necessarily be aware of, and, you know, and be able to produce a good report as a journalist.
Yeah, no, very, very much so. And then some of that leads on to these next couple of slides, really, which goes into the research of this story. Because part of, you know, apart from the traditional means by which journalists research their stories, there are more and more ways in which journalists can do their work online using open source tools. As Katie Polglase says here, you know, you're sometimes often more of a detective than a reporter. There's more to a news story than just the event that grabs the journalist or the audience's attention. News stories are about what's being hidden, what's not being said, what lies beneath the surface. And just to give you an idea into open source tools, I'm not going to get so much into it in this session today. I will say there is a new, very, very good open source course on our CNN Academy Hub that all of you guys can take. It's really good. It goes through all the different verification skills, and there are tests in there as well, exercises that you can work through to try and geolocate and identify images, find out if they're real, when they were taken, all of those things. So you can find out a lot more about open source on the CNN Academy course. But here are just some of the stories that we've used it for here at CNN. And first up, it's worth saying, what is open source? Open source is really any available, freely available information. So that could be databases, open databases. A lot of the times it can also be coming from social media as well. So these can be posts, images, and videos that we find online. But they've helped CNN break a lot of stories over the years, such as the Church Catholic abuser scandal. Our investigation used social media posts and historical records. For the Lekki Tollgate massacre, we used video and image geolocation and metadata as well. Again, you'll find out what metadata is in the open source course. The Nigerian government report into the Lekki Tollgate massacre repeatedly referenced CNN's reporting on the story in their findings. So it shows how it has real impact. The Ethiopian Airlines story that we broke a number of years ago. As a result of stories about arms trafficking, employees of Ethiopian Airlines have since tipped off CNN journalists about other stories. It just shows how good journalism builds trust and encourages sources to come forward. In Ukraine, satellite imagery, geolocation used all the time and helped us to show the buildup of Russian forces well before the invasion took place. And in the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh, an Al Jazeera journalist in the West Bank, we discovered that Google Maps doesn't cover Jenin, where it took place. So we had to use OS map tools instead, in conjunction with eyewitness videos, in order to piece together what happened. So it just shows you how you have to be a detective as well as a good journalist. So moving on here. So we've discussed what makes a good story, what makes a good video story, your responsibilities as a journalist, and then how do you go about finding your story? So let's now say that you found your story. You found an engaging story you want to tell. Once you've done that, it's important to frame it for a broad audience. And in order to do that, you need to narrow your focus. You need to distill that idea down to its core and never stray too far from it. It's not your job as a journalist to explain everything there is to know about a particular subject. It is your job to find an interesting angle on that subject and ideally interesting characters to help you tell it. One way to do that is to think in terms of stories, not topics. Your story must have a beginning, middle, and end, a narrative arc that will keep viewers glued until the end. Think about a novel, a book, a film, always a beginning, middle, and end. And the viewer or reader is led through that. It's the same for any report that you produce as well. Take Gaza, for example. Audiences are sadly used to seeing the destruction out there, but give them one family's compelling story, again, from start to middle to end, and they will hopefully sit up and listen. Never forget what sparked your interest in the story in the first place. What made it relevant to your life or helped you connect with the story? Because what interested you may well interest others too. And never ever forget, why will anyone else care about this story? The care factor should be very, very high on your list. If you don't care about the story, your audience won't either. If you can't explain to your audience why they should care about that story, then you will have lost them from the very start. One good way to do this is to write the headline first. Doesn't matter whether it's a video piece or any other type of piece, but try writing the headline, because most headlines, certainly at CNN, are 120 characters long. That's not much. So can you distill your story down into 120 characters or less? That will really help you organize your story, your thoughts in your head. Can you tell an audience in 120 characters or less why they should care about that story? Once you're able to achieve that, everything else should flow on from there. Just before we move on, Eric, did you have anything you want to add to that about framing your story and keeping that narrow focus?
I would just double down on the fact that, having a good headline really helps. And that is how I've always, whenever you're a little bit unsure about, how you want to frame your story, thinking of a headline really helps you narrow the focus. Because for me, everything else just flows from there. In addition to that, in terms of framing your story, one thing that I always keep in mind when I'm out filming something, producing something, is to keep a very close eye on what could potentially be the opening shot to a story if we're specifically talking about a video piece, because the first shots of a video story should be engaging, should be something that catches attention. So that is something that I always keep an eye out for as well when I'm out. And that also helps, once you've identified that, I think that also helps you frame your story around it.
Yeah. I mean, it is that those crucial opening shots, and sometimes opening script line as well to a piece that are so important. I know I've spoken to correspondents before, which have told me that when they come to write a script for TV, they spend the majority of their time thinking about that top line of script and also the last one as well. Everything else kind of just sort of fits in the middle, but it's crucial to get that first line of script right, because that's your opportunity to grab your audience. And the same with your elements. That's why a lot of the best elements will go towards the top of the piece. These days, and particularly with digital audiences, you do not have very long to grab their attention. If you can't do that in the first 5 seconds or so of your piece, they're going to click on and you'll have lost them. So crucial to think about how you engage your audience right from the top of your piece. So I'm going to talk a bit more now about pitching your story. So we've talked about what makes a good story, how to find one. Let's say you've found one. Let's say you've narrowed your focus right down. Well, now you need to pitch your story to your editors to get it on air. Otherwise, it will never see the light of day. And it's important to think that editors do not have time to get into your head in order to understand why you think your story is worth putting resources behind. You have to find a way to communicate it to them quickly and comprehensively. So if researching your story is about deepening your knowledge and broadening your understanding, pitching is about bringing that all into focus. So again, this is another good way to help you frame your story. You've got to sell this story to your bosses, to your editors. So that is a really good time to think about, why should they care about this story? Because if they don't care about this story, your audiences won't either. It is your editor's job to make it hard for you at the pitching stage. But the truth of it is they're being cruel to be kind, because in the end, a great story starts with an effective pitch. Writing a good pitch is not just about getting your editors to give you the go-ahead. It's also a process to help you understand exactly what your story offers the audience. It's to help you pursue your story effectively and efficiently. So, what are the good features of a good pitch? I'm going to put this out to you guys again. What do you think, given everything that we've talked about so far, what do you think makes a good pitch? What should be in your pitch? Again, just pop up your hand or pop it in the chat box. What do you think would make a good pitch? I'll give you the first one. A good pitch needs to strike a balance between being brief and being informative. If you cannot convey the essence of your story in 1 or 2 sentences, then your ideas themselves are not focused enough. You need to think a lot harder about what your story is really meant to tell your audience. You may have discovered a lot of interesting information, but if that doesn't come together in a single, easy to understand top line, then it's not going to get past your editor and it's not going to make sense to your audience either. What else do you guys think a good pitch needs to be? Can you just promise anything in your pitch? Yeah, it does. A good pitch, that is correct, needs to have impact. Yeah, needs to be impactful for your audiences. Again, it's this idea of why do I care? It should be run through the heart of everything that you do with your story? Why should an audience care about this story? It's important that your story is realistic. You know, don't aim for the moon just because it's going to get your boss's attention. If your pitch relies on a lot of elements that are only 50-50 in terms of how likely you're ordered to get them, you better not pitch them as if they're 100% certain, because raising expectations at this stage will only set yourself up for disappointment. So it's better to play it relatively safe. Make sure that the core of the pitch consists of elements that you are fairly certain that you can get, and you're not relying on unlikely outcomes. Anything you find along the way will just be a bonus. And it needs to be distinctive. Journalism is a competitive business. And while this makes our jobs harder, audiences will benefit because they get a wide variety of perspectives. So a pitch needs to explain why your story is going to be distinctive. Eric, I'm sure you've had a few pitches in your time. Certainly from what I've been told, that often the first two questions that come up are why now? And how is this different to what our competitors have done? What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think why now? The question of why now is a really important question to answer as well, especially in a in an actual newsroom, because I think a lot of times when we're pitching, when we want to do a certain story about a particular topic, a lot of times, if there is a good peg, which means that something related to like that there was a new development in relation to that particular story or topic, then it's easier for you to do a piece around it, to sort of like get your message across. So one example I would raise is that, for example, right, there have been a lot of concerns about the water crisis in Taiwan, and whether it is sufficient to support Taiwan's semiconductor industry, because Taiwan quite heavily relies on rainwater for this purpose. And 3 years ago, there was a period when there was very little rainfall, which makes the situation a lot more serious. And a lot of the reservoirs had really low water levels. And because of that, we felt that it was a good peg for us to tell an international audience about Taiwan's water crisis, because it's timely. We were able to go to the reservoirs and film there, and to show to our audience that water levels are dangerously low. And it's just the timeliness of the story. And I think that is a really important thing to answer, because there are lots of priorities in the newsroom, with breaking news, with feature stories, and you want to stand out and convince your editor that it is a good time to do it now.
你要是做对你有损伤的东西，你肯定是找的是，对不对？那这个美金这一块都不是几万块钱的事，你随便都得100-200万人民币的事情啊，对不对？对，还
Everyone can mute, please.
Yeah, I was about to wrap up, but essentially, there are lots of priorities in the newsroom. So if you want to convince your editors that now is a good time to do a story, it's good to identify a peg around it, or to make use of a peg to and while audiences are paying attention to a particular issue, we should seize that moment to do a story around that, because audience interest might they might lose their interest from a few weeks from now, and nobody might read your story if you wait too long.
Timing is absolutely crucial. And Mia, you're right as well. A clear theme, and again, this sort of comes back to the idea of narrowing your focus and keeping your focus throughout your story. So I want to show you a video now. This is a report that our Christian Amanpour filed a couple of months back now in Ukraine. And what I want you to do whilst you're watching this video is to think about the elements that Christiane, I'm going to be honest here, it probably was her team rather than Christiane who put this in the pitch, but think about the elements that Christiane's team would have put in their pitch. What is the key selling points of this story to their editors? So take a look at this piece and we'll talk afterwards. And I will warn you, this is a piece about a hospital on a train in Ukraine. So there are a few images in this piece of injured people, if you'd like to look away.
On a hot, late summer morning, departure time is fast approaching at this railway station in Ukraine. But this is no ordinary train. It's a hospital on wheels, evacuating dozens of wounded military personnel away from the Eastern Front as Russia's brutal offensive grinds on. Paramedics carefully loading patient after patient, many of them unconscious, onto repurposed carriages. It's a highly organized special operation and it's never been seen before. CNN gained unprecedented and exclusive access to what so far has remained a closely guarded military secret. But everybody's still... Before the train moves off, I meet 35-year-old Alexander, wounded by a drone strike, which has caused him to go deaf in one ear. His call sign...
Just checking, sorry, I'm just pausing there. Eric, Felix, you guys can see this, correct? Yeah, okay, just checking.
But he doesn't feel it.
Very tired, but hard times, and we маємо далі продовжувати боротися, як би важко не було би.
Do you feel that you have enough people, enough weapons to defend?
No.
You don't have enough?
No. Не вистачає людей, однозначно, і однозначно не вистачає зброї.
As the train rolls on, we make our way to the intensive care unit, where several soldiers are on life support. Bed after bed of broken and battered bodies, lives shattered in an instant. 90% of the wounds being treated here are from shrapnel. And yet, many of these patients know they'll be patched up just to be sent back to the front as soon as possible. This train and its cargo sum up Ukraine's state of military affairs. Mostly ordinary citizens who've answered the call, outmanned, outgunned by Russia, and yet still putting up a hell of a fight. Nurse Yulia makes this journey twice a week. How do you...
Okay, I'm going to stop that piece there. So, Christiane has filed this video from on board this train carrying injured Ukrainian soldiers. So, what do you think was at the heart of her pitch? Mia, do you want to go first?
No, I didn't find the video before, so I just saw it. Next one.
Okay, no worries. What else do you what do you guys think? What's the key aspect of this story? What's the biggest selling point of this story that Christiane or her team would have pitched to their editors? How does this story be distinctive? How is this story distinctive from every other story you've seen about Ukraine? Anyone want to have a guess? First-hand information? Yeah, I mean Christiane's there. She's with the soldiers. Anyone else?
I think it revealed the other picture of the war. Actually, well, the war is still on at that time, but I think no one will care about those soldiers who were injured. and we don't know how the country would take care of them. In fact, you see that they don't have the weapon, it seems like they don't have the medicine, they don't have the people to take care of them. The war is going on. I mean, it's about the story behind the war, about the real stuff, which is we don't see it. I mean, in the news, probably we only see those bombing, those the building destroyed, but we don't see those soldiers. I think this is another way to take a look about the war.
Yeah, very much so. And this kind of harks back to what I was saying before about these ongoing stories. You know, Ukraine is another good example. It's been going on for some years now, and shows no sign of ending. Where, you know, journalists have to think hard about new angles, new ways to show this story to their audiences. And one way, and certainly what would have been at the heart of the pitch that Christiane and her team would have put to their bosses to make this distinctive, is the access. This is the crucial element of this story, the biggest selling point of this story, the access that Christiane and her team managed to get. As Felix rightly points out, you know, we haven't seen on board one of these trains before. Perhaps many of you didn't even know they existed, but they are taking place across Ukraine. They are running across Ukraine, ferrying these injured soldiers that have, you know, been crushed by this war. And unfortunately, I don't know, I can't remember whether we got to it in the report or not, but as Christiane points out, you know, a lot of these soldiers, unfortunately, will be patched up and then sent back to the front lines to continue fighting in this war. So it's this access that Christiane got. That's what makes it distinctive. That's why when the editors would have said, well, why should we do this story? Why should we spend the money sending Christiane out to Ukraine? They would have said, because we've got on board one of these trains. And we think we can make a really engaging story about the material that we get on board these trains. And things like this aren't easy to get access to. If you ever try and film in a hospital, it's not easy. A lot of times you need permission from the patients, and if the patients aren't conscious, the patients' families, before you can go anywhere near them. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. So access like this does not come easy. Timeframes are a big part of any good pitch. Your editor is going to like your idea a lot less if it means one of his journalists or her journalist is going to be tied up for weeks on end and not available for breaking news stories. Ultimately, news organizations are making a cost-benefit analysis, weighing up the benefit of pursuing a story with the resources involved. So obviously, cost is going to be another key important factor. A breakdown of the major costs that the organization is going to have to pay out to make your story happen will help your editor come to a decision. And lastly, platforms and formats. These days, our journalists don't just work for TV, they don't just work for digital, they work across platforms. So if your pitch contains a clear plan of, right, this is the piece for TV, this is maybe the explainer piece we can do for digital, or maybe it's a big interactive piece with maps and facts and statistics and all this sort of stuff. If you maybe look, we could offer up this person, they could be part of a podcast as well. If you've thought long and hard about all the different places your story could appear in, including on social media as well, the social version of the story, then again, your editor is going to like that a lot more. Anything you want to add to that, Eric?
No, I think you covered most of it for this one. Yeah, formats and platforms in particular. For me, if you're really looking to do a successful pitch, because if your story can appear in multiple platforms, then from a newsroom perspective, there are various departments or various teams that can perhaps split the cost of your travel to do that story. So it helps a lot.
Yeah, very much so. So we've pitched our story. Guess what? Our story's been approved. Brilliant. Okay, right. Well, now we have to get ready to go on the road. And as David Culver puts it here, it's crucial not to go in with a rigid storyboard and be determined to hit every bullet point. I mean, obviously, it gives you some sort of structure, but once you're there, you begin to realize there are other aspects to the story. So, from what David is saying here, it's clear that when you think about planning for a piece, it needs to guide your work in the field. But it's important to remember that it's only a guide and not a template for the story itself. Most importantly, when your story planning is not more important than what's going on around you. Refer to it, but don't defer to it. So when you're coming to plan your story, you might do it in the form of a storyboard. Now, these are things that we often see in motion pictures, in films, perhaps TV documentaries, perhaps TV dramas, where before people go out and start planning the story, they storyboard it. And probably the best way to explain what a storyboard is, it looks like a comic book, essentially, with each scene, and it's got its own different picture and a description of what's going on underneath. Now, as journalists, we're not drawing each and every scene that we're going to go and film. But before we go into a story, we should have a good idea. We should have planned hard for our story, so we have a good idea of what we're going to do when we hit the ground. Because you can't just go to a country thousands of miles away and expect to find a good story. So who are the people you want to speak to? What are the things you're going to want to film? All of this stuff needs to be carefully planned beforehand. But as David Culver here says, it shouldn't be what you stick to rigidly when you get there. Because quite often, and Eric, I'll bring you in just a second, quite often when you hit the ground running, our journalists will tell you that you need to be prepared for the unexpected and not to go in with your eyes closed. So, as part of your planning, visuals, crucial. What are you going to see when you get there? Who are you going to speak to when you're there? What events will be happening while you're there? Are you expecting protests, a news conference, a big development to take place? All of this needs to form part of your planning. And you might want to start thinking about a piece to camera as well. You know, where could you say you're going to Antarctica, you know, somewhere like that? Where could you do an amazing piece to camera to show that you're there? But crucially, it's important that you take into account everything that comes up along the way. And as Ben Wiedemann puts it here, part of the pleasure and the enjoyment of this job is the unpredictability of it. If everyone can please mute their mics, that would be great. Yeah, part of the pleasure and the enjoyment of this job is the unpredictability of it. You may have a general idea of what you want to do, but you're talking to people who might tell you something that you didn't know, or tip you off to something that you can pursue. So you always have to keep an open mind. Is that what you found, Eric?
Yeah, especially when it comes to protests and typhoons and earthquakes and things like that. You know, breaking news stories. You can have all the planning, you could have before getting on the ground, but once you're there, you might just see something unexpected. That will, you might be thinking about doing, 2 Vox Pops, 2 interviews on the ground, but that could be really good visuals. Or there could be an arrest, something unexpected happening on the ground that you just have to pivot your story to that to cover that particular event. So keep an open mind for sure.
And I suppose also, if you're planning a story from thousands of miles away, particularly with a country that you've never been to before, you're making a lot of assumptions based off your reading. And I'm assuming sometimes, Eric, when you get there, you can sometimes find that those assumptions just are completely unfounded, and actually the story is something completely different.
Yeah, and you can achieve that by talking to the locals once you're on the ground. We were doing a story in Vietnam a few months ago when Putin was visiting the country after he visited North Korea. So Putin was in North Korea and then Vietnam, and we were deployed to Vietnam to cover his visit and also talk to locals about what they feel towards it. And sometimes before you get there, obviously you want to do some planning. You might have some assumptions, as you said. You might have read up some of the articles, but once you're on the ground and actually talking to people with the help of a fixer that we hired, you just have to be flexible, and because ultimately your reporting has to reflect on, has to be reflective of the mood on the ground and reflective of people's feelings on the ground. And so, keeping an open mind, circling back to that, but I think it's really important because you can't plan for everything.
No, not at all. So when you're on the ground, just to recap here, it's important to get what you came for. You can almost think of it like a dinner party you're throwing for your guests, if you like. You've got a shopping list of elements, or, in the case of the dinner party, food that you want to go and you need to get. So you've got a list of elements that you want to get. But it's also crucial to observe what's going on around you. Because, as Eric was saying just then, it can be very different from what you expected to see. You might find that the story you wanted to tell is being overtaken by events, and you might find that elements of another story are actually much more compelling than the one that you went to cover in the first place. Talk to people again. It's crucial. The people you meet on the way are your most valuable guides to the stories that matter. You can read up all that you want to about a country, but it's no comparison to just speaking to people who actually live there. You might have come up with your story from reading social media posts or talking to experts or researching some area of your own interest. But when you're on the ground, the people you meet become the most important people in the world to listen to, people that are being affected by the events. Stay flexible. As Ben Wiedemann says, unpredictability and uncertainty that come with it, that's all part of the job. But seriously, when you're under pressure in the field, it's easy to forget why we became journalists in the first place, because we're interested in the world around us. And that world is constantly moving, constantly throwing us curveballs. And communicate with your team. It's one of the most important aspects of working efficiently in the field. If you're fortunate enough to be working with a photojournalist, a fixer, or a producer, like Eric, you need them to be fully integrated in the story, preferably from the moment your pitch has been accepted, and to start putting it together, possibly in a storyboard. Because if they are aware of your initial objectives and interested in the final outcomes, that they can help you get from plan A to B to C to D, whichever way you work to get to the final outcome. Basically, what you want is every member of your team providing the thing that they do best in relation to the objectives that you all share, and helping you to get the best from your time on the ground and adapt to your changing circumstances. And Eric, I know you probably worked with quite a few in your time, but a lot of the journalists that I've spoken to often talk about the photojournalists, the cameramen and women on the ground, as being some of the best sources of questions. I don't understand why this is like this, and also just coming up with new ideas. They're a crucial member of the team.
Yeah, I think, quite a lot of them, have spent, because I think a lot of the video journalists, they also like taking photos when they're free. And, I think, a lot of them have traveled to many places as well, that kind of experienced. And even if you're just talking about, say, like, for example, here in the Taipei Bureau, I think our photojournalist, he likes traveling around the island all the time and visiting various villages and speaking with a lot of people. And so, sometimes, he is a really valuable source of information when it comes to, let's say, if you want to do a story about the indigenous population in Taiwan, he has some of the, best contacts, you could ever imagine. So, really making sure that every member of the team is engaged helps a lot, because it's not just the job of a reporter or a producer to put together, a story. It's the whole team.
Yeah. So I want to talk more now about sources. Trust is incredibly difficult to earn, but very easy to lose. Your news outlet has a bank of trust. It's been slowly building up over the years so that you can go out in the field and have people trust you. You yourself will have your own reserve of trust that you've invested a lot of work in over the time you've been a journalist. Trust is a factor when you're talking to people at the center of the story, because that is often what enables them to open up their lives and share their emotions with you. And once you've done that, you have that responsibility towards them. As Deborah Rayner says here, there are journalists who people specifically trust and want to tell those stories to because they can see the kind of storyteller that they are, or they can see the kind of outlet that the journalist works for. But you absolutely can't break the trust of the people that you're filming or writing about or photographing. As Ben Wiedemann says here, show them that you've done your homework, that you are interested in who they are. It's the interpersonal aspect of this work that is most important if you want to do your story well and successfully. And you have to think about it this way. How many of you have ever had a journalist turn up in your neighborhood and start asking questions? It's sudden, it's surprising, it's potentially invasive. And it's also not always clear what the benefit of talking to a journalist is. You might assume that getting a story out there is in the interest of the people involved in that story, but that might always not be the way that they see it. Often the stories that we work on involve painful experiences for those involved. And so we need to remind ourselves to be a human being. When you're a journalist with a story to produce, it's surprising how easy it is to be a human being. So when it comes to managing sources, what do you guys think are the most important aspects of being a journalist and managing those sources? What should you be as a journalist when you're dealing with those sources? I'm going to give you the first one. Be polite. Introduce yourself. Explain who you are, or what you're doing, with no assumptions that they have any obligation to talk to you or let you film or take pictures. What else how else should you interact with your sources? Just pop up your hand or put it in the chat box. How do you think you need to interact with sources to get the most out of them and just to be respectful? I'll give you another one. Be likable. It's important because obviously the basic reason why you can continue to interact with someone is because you're enjoying or at least not being upset by that interaction. So be polite, be likable, be patient. And that obviously means giving as much time as a person needs to come around to the idea of cooperating with you. People are not always working to your deadlines, and you need to adapt to them. Sometimes you need to understand, as a journalist, you are speaking to people on possibly the worst day of their entire lives because something awful has happened where they are, and you have to now speak to them. And you need to take that into account. And right then in that moment, the most important thing to them is not talking to you. It's not meeting your deadlines. It's dealing with the aftermath of whatever has happened. So you need to be patient. Be persistent. And that means demonstrating as sensitively as possible why their story is important to you. That means translating your professional motivations into a personal register. As Ben said, do your homework. That means being informed in advance, knowing who a person is, the basics of their situation, and even just how to pronounce their name properly can easily win you points early in a conversation to make it go smoothly. And keep your word, because keeping the promises you make to people you meet will mean that you can continue to make promises with confidence as you go forward. That means being clear about how you're going to use someone's testimony in your story, and especially about anonymity, if that is a concern for the person you are speaking to. If you've said you're not going to identify someone, you better then not identify them or do something silly which could identify them, even inadvertently. You know, our journalists will often say that when they're speaking with someone who doesn't want their identity be revealed, they'll save their name, they'll save them in their phone under a completely different name and ask them to do the same. You know, it shouldn't be Nick CNN in their phone. And it's important as well to be careful with how you compile notes about someone, or perhaps even an interview with someone that wants to keep anonymous. You need to take specific steps to ensure that that information could not be recoverable, say if you got somebody searched at the airport or something like that. So keep your work and word and work hard to ensure that you don't put your sources in danger. And yeah, someone's put on the chat group here, legal as well. You know, there'll always be legal aspects to all stories. You need to ensure that what you're doing is not putting your sources in danger, first of all, their lives in danger, but also in legal jeopardy as well. And if the latter is a possibility, then you need to make sure that they're aware of the consequences of speaking to you. It's also important, this is a two-way situation here. Your source needs their trust in you, but you need to be able to trust your source as well. And no matter what kind of source you're talking to, there are checks and safeguards that you always have to be doing to ensure that you can trust what they are telling you. Remember that people have, there we go. Remember that people have different motivations for telling you their story. Even with eyewitnesses, the first guy that comes up to you and starts talking may have personal reasons to tell you their version that you're not aware of. So talk to other eyewitnesses and see if the different versions check out. Double check everything they say. And knowing as much about your sources can give you a better idea of what their angle is on the story. There are people who will tell you what you want to hear in order to get their version of the story across. People who are savvy about how journalism works. That's why it's always important to double check who your sources are, especially to find out if they've spoken to media before. And crucially, back it up. You should never put a claim in your story that you have not backed up with a second or third source. Every fact has to stand up on its own. Never allow yourself to run with what a source has told you just because it suits your story. That's a very dangerous path. Eric, have you got anything to add on dealing with sources?
I would think that mastering the arts of, building and building sources and, having a healthy relationship with them is a really important aspect of being a successful journalist, because, there are often people who will be able to give you exclusive information, like scholars or, government officials, like they'll probably be able to give you something that is not necessarily known publicly, for example. And there are also sources who will be able to connect you with other people that will be of interest to you for sit-down interviews and things like that. So one example I would give is that, here in Taiwan, we have been focusing on building our sources within the semiconductor industry, particularly the TSMC, which is hugely important for producing advanced semiconductor chips for all the tech companies around the world. And gaining access into a TSMC facility has been very, very difficult because they obviously they need to trust you. They don't want information to be they don't want you to be reporting on information that that are considered sensitive or secret. And so it took me quite a long time to gain their trust. But last year we were given access to one of their newcomer training facilities in Taichung City, And that was a really good piece that we ran last year for Marketplace Asia, which is one of our monthly business programs. And that is only possible because I did spend quite a lot of time and efforts to build connections with people inside the company, and also gaining their trust, and also telling them what we're able to provide to them, like providing a platform for them to tell how they've been treating training their newcomers, and how they're very much dedicated to attracting talents from around the world. And so it goes both ways. Obviously, sources, your sources will they always have a reason to speak to you, and sometimes it can sort of be mutually beneficial, because they need to get their message across, and you also want to get access to information. But the thing to highlight here, obviously, is that we have to do our due diligence. We have to be especially when, say, like a government official comes to you with certain information, you have to think why they're doing it and whether it is really truthful before you report it to the public.
Yeah, really, really important. Understanding the motivations of your sources. Okay, we're just going to do a few more, cover a few more topics here. Then I promise we'll take a 30-minute break so everyone can refresh. But the two things I want to talk about before we wrap up this particular session, the first one is placing yourself in the story. So we talked before about when we were talking about the various elements you want to achieve when you're on the ground. We talked about a stand-up, a piece to camera. They're called different things in different places, but essentially it's somehow involving yourself in the story. And oftentimes this can come with a correspondent stood in front of a camera saying something or showing something or doing something. As Michael Holmes here says, our longtime anchor and correspondent, been in the business for longer than I've been alive. If it's a visual story, the remnants of a battle or an explosion or a natural disaster, and you're walking through somebody's destroyed house, that can be powerful rather than just the sterile pictures on their own. But the one thing you have to understand is the journalist is not the story. So you have to have a good reason to appear in your story rather than just let the story, the interviews, the images speak for themselves. But there are times when appearing in your report is important. And let's think about what those times might be. So when does a reporter stand-up work? Well, I kind of alluded to this before, but when you have an unusual location, I talked about potentially going to Antarctica, if you were there, pretty unusual, not many people go there, and you get some pretty spectacular pieces to camera there. Shooting a piece to camera can be a way of introducing a viewer to what is particularly noteworthy about the scene. You might need to add some words to explain just how vast or unique or significant the location really is. In these cases, the reporter's presence in the shot is really there to draw out what it is about the location that made it important for them to go there to report the story. Oftentimes, it's when there are things that are happening around you, particularly you might be in the middle of a protest, a gunfight. There might be something going on that's crazy, or you might just want to show the viewer where you are. Look, over there is the palace. Here is the petrol station where this attack took place. You're showing your viewer, showing them the lay of the land, where everything is. It's a good idea to get in front of the camera to convey the immediacy of the situation, what's going on while you're there. A few words or gestures in a piece to camera can explain fast-moving action much better than a voiceover would, and has the added effect of transporting the viewer into the scene, since, as I mentioned before, the reporter acts as a stand-in for the viewer themselves. You are the eyes and ears, every sense, if you like, of the viewers. They can't be there. You are. And then this third one is a bit up for debate. There are some journalists that say if there are no good pictures, then that's a good opportunity to introduce a piece to camera, a linking shot, if you like, to sort of link two parts of the story together. And there are two trains of thought with this one. The first is that it's good to do. That's a nice use of a piece to camera. But then there's the other train of thought on this, which is that actually that's lazy journalism. That you always should be thinking about other ways to demonstrate a particular element of your story to the viewer. If you think that the piece to camera is the only way, then perhaps you're not getting creative enough. Perhaps you haven't thought of a good visual way to demonstrate that part of the story to your viewer. So as I say, there's no right or wrong answers here. There's different trains of thought among different journalists. But yeah, some people like to use them when there's no good pictures. Other journalists like to try to think of an alternative. So just before we wrap on this particular session, I want to talk about the narrative thread. So you've found your story, you've pitched it, it's been accepted, you're on the ground, you've got your elements, you've shot a piece to camera, you've done your interviews. Now you have to pull it all together. And to do that, you have to find this narrative thread. And this is what I was talking to you guys before about, with where your story has to have a beginning, middle, and end. You know, it might be that your story starts in a positive state. Something happens that's negative, that throws the whole story, into chaos. And then it might end either in a positive state or perhaps a negative state. There's always that beginning, middle, and end to your story. And as David Culver here says, no two stories are the same. But when you're thinking about putting together a story and you're writing a flow that would hopefully be engaging, you're thinking about what can keep people's attention. Again, keeping that why do I care factor high and keeping your audience engaged throughout. And it's more than just the pictures. It's more than just the interviews. You only have a story when you can carry your viewer from one element to the next. That's why David Culver calls it a flow. So, your narrative thread. Possibly the simplest way to guarantee that you have a good narrative thread is to structure your story around a compelling character, someone who stands out, someone who's directly affected by a news event, will personalize that narrative and make it relevant to viewers who can put themselves in their shoes. You'll often see stories that start and end with particular characters whose lived experience provides a jumping off point from where the bigger picture can be explained. An investigation can have a narrative arc where the facts of the story are revealed to the viewer as the journalist discovers them along the way. You're almost taking your audience on a journey here. Here, the journalist acts as a stand-in for the audience who can join them on a voyage of discovery. Of course, there needs to be strong in-the-field elements to this kind of story because phone calls and online research do not make for compelling visuals. The journey or a process. Sometimes being close to the events makes the journalist's journey or the process of reporting a story a useful way to carry a story forward. Again, the journalist acts as a representative for the audience, giving them an entry into the story and a reason to continue to watch. And finally, a country or a place. Thinking about characters again, there are other kinds of characters than people. Sometimes a location or a country can function as a character when the story is the history or the change that a place is going through as a result of events. COVID could be a character in your piece. There are other characters than just people. There can be places, there can be things, there can be events. And just lastly, before we wrap today, the challenges. And I think David Culver puts it right here when he says, I think that my role is not only to uncover stories and break news and cover breaking news as it's happening, but also to find those relatable aspects where people can connect to another person. And that really brings it full circle from what we started to talk about at the beginning of this session. When you're looking for your good story, a story that stands out to your audience, you have to find a way to make it relatable. so that someone sitting, again, thousands of miles away, different country, completely disconnected from what's going on, in this other part of the world, why should they sit up and care about this story? You have to make it relatable. You have to have strong characters that people can relate to and put themselves in their shoes. And that is a big part of the art of storytelling. Eric, before we wrap and take a quick break, anything you want to add to any of that?
No, not for now. I think you covered it pretty well.
Great. Well, let's take a well-deserved break. I make it in my time. What time is it where you are, Eric?
7 minutes to 6.
7 minutes to 6. Okay. Well, let's reconvene at 6:20. So 6:20 your time. We'll all come back and we'll cover digital storytelling. So 6:20. We'll come back and we'll start again. Thanks, guys.
Recording stopped.
Hi all, we'll get going again in just a second.
Recording in progress.
Okay, welcome back. And for this second session, what I really want to do is focus on digital storytelling. Now, for those that know about CNN or have read about CNN, you'll no doubt be aware that CNN is currently going through a bit of a digital revolution, if you like, under our new current boss, Mark Thompson. He has pledged to put digital at the forefront of everything at CNN, and it has resulted in some fairly large changes across the company in how we work. So just to give you an understanding, certainly in our newsrooms, we used to have quite separate news gathering teams working on our news desks and digital teams working on our digital output. So the way things used to work is that a story would break, our news desk team would research that story, try to verify whether it was true, and once they verified that, get the information out there in a news alert. That would then be picked up by our digital teams and our TV teams, who would then report that information out. Now, under our new reorganization, our digital teams are our news desk teams. They're one and the same now, working together. So story breaks, it will be the same person that verifies that story that will then go on to post that online and deal with the digital story as well. So our news gathering and digital teams are now one and the same. And the reason is to get the information out there as quickly as possible for our digital audiences, because let's face it, when you receive a piece of information these days about a breaking news story, it's much more likely to be from a digital source than it would be from a TV source. But also to make sure that all our news gathering efforts have our digital audiences in mind, so that when we deploy, when we report, we are serving our digital audiences as much as possible. Now, that does not mean that our TV audiences are about. It doesn't mean that TV is going away from CNN. TV has and always will be a massive part of what we do here at CNN. You know, particularly in America and particularly around the world. That's not going anywhere. But the point of these reorganizations at the moment is to just realize that the future is digital. More and more people get their news from digital sources on a day-to-day basis. As I say, when you find out about a breaking news story, it's very often from a our various teams here at CNN. So with that in mind, first up, let's talk about multimedia journalism. So these days, journalists are not just producing on one medium. It used to be that a print journalist didn't have to think about video, and a TV journalist didn't have to think about interactive features. Nowadays, there's a lot less separation. News outlets don't restrict themselves to just one medium. And if you, as future journalists, if you want to be employable, You have to be able to work across all the different mediums. You have to be true multimedia journalists. Is that a challenge? Of course. But does it present opportunities? Definitely yes, too. So where do we start when we talk about the transition from traditional digital journalism? We start with the audience. CNN, as I mentioned, is originally and primarily a broadcast news outlet. So the comparison is between television, which we call a linear medium, and digital, which is non-linear. Take a look at what we mean by that. What is a linear medium? Well, basically, a linear medium is one that starts at the beginning and follows a line until the end. There's only one line from start to finish. No branching off, no options. A TV show is a linear format. So is a novel or a written article. You watch it, hopefully, from start to finish. You don't have to make any decisions along the way. It's a case of turning it on and watching it. So what can we say about linear TV audiences? Well, in general, they have very regular habits. They tune in at a particular time of day, sitting in perhaps the usual place, usually in their living room or at home. They may have a favorite news anchor. They may identify with the politics of the channel they are watching. And so they have a loyalty or identification with.
Recording in progress.
We call this a lean back experience because it's relatively passive. Once someone has turned on the TV and chosen which channel to watch, they don't really participate in the experience. As long as they are tuned in, they will watch the news that is put in front of them. We make decisions about stories that they see. So as a producer, which I was for many years, we would be across the rundown. We would decide what story we're going to lead with, what comes next, how we're going to treat each story, what parts of the story, we're going to concentrate on. These were all the decisions of the producer. And then once the show goes out, the audiences don't have any say in the order of the rundown or what they see. That's a lean back experience. Now, it's clear from this graph where the trend is heading. Traditional linear audiences in the US who choose television as their source of news are almost a quarter since 2013. Back then, online was already the top choice among Americans and remains so to this day. The other key trend is obviously the rise of social media as a source of news. I'm assuming quite likely where a lot of you guys get your news from. That's almost a quarter over the same period, with Facebook and YouTube leading the way, particularly in the US. So it's clear that any serious news organization must ensure that digital audiences are at the heart of everything that they do. And CNN is no exception. So, is that they're a lot less predictable than linear TV audiences. That's because they play a much more active role in their user experiences. There are all kinds of ways in which consuming digital content requires the user to make decisions. While linear TV audiences have almost no choice in what they watch, digital news consumers are making decisions all the time. So, what do you guys think? When you go to consume news on digital audiences, what sort of decisions are you making about what you watch, what you listen, what you read, even where you go? What sort of decisions are you making as a consumer, as a consumer of news? What do you guys think? I'll give you the first one just for starters. What device? They have to choose a certain device to access the content. And once they're on their smartphone or their computer, there are many other things they can do than just read the news. What other decisions are we making as a digital audience, other than just the device that we consume it on? Time. Good, Christian. Yeah. The amount of time there, I mean, with digital, there's no fixed time to consume content. Consuming news on the move, during breaks at work, or during work, let's face it, or even in bed at night. This also means that digital news consumers are less likely to devote a fixed amount of time to consuming the news. They could decide to do something else at any moment. We're just coming up to Black Friday here in across Europe and in America, and I'm assuming that going on to shopping sites will be a big draw for consumers at any given moment. So they can decide to switch away at any time. What other decisions are we making as digital news consumers? Yeah, Felix, you're definitely. Interests are much more selective, personalized. You decide who you follow on social media. You decide which sites that you visit for your news. Sometimes that will depend on your interests, on your political sway, if you like. Yeah, you're much more personalized here. And also, we need to look at how consumers find the content in the first place. And again, with digital audiences, that comes from many different ways. The path to get to your story could be through a web search like Google, social media, chat groups, or even an alert from a news app. Reliable sources, yeah. I mean, people that share our stories, say on social media, if you respect them, if you follow them, then perhaps you'll click on that story to read it. I mean, even for those that start at the homepage, which, I'll tell you right now, Google is the main way that people find our content. But even if they go straight to CNN.com, what article do they read on the homepage? There's plenty of different types of article on our homepage. So yeah, what do they read once they get there? How do they consume it can vary a lot. We know that lots of users will skim read or scan a piece of text before they decide to read more deeply. Are they going to watch a video with the sound off or on, or their phone upright or horizontal? There's lots of different ways that people consume the content as well. And of course, how much of it do they consume? Are they going to stick through from start to finish? Online audiences are not patient people. They have a ton of other sources and things playing on their time. It might even be not online. You might have to go and cook the dinner or look after the kids. So yeah, they're not patient people. They've got other things they need to do. And reading your article is going to take a lot of effort to make them spend that time to read it from start to finish. And of course, each and every one of these decisions implies that the user can choose to stop or change what they're doing at any given point. Ultimately, it is hard to overstate how active digital news consumers are compared with TV audiences. If you could please mute yourself. If you have a question or something to say, please just stick up your hand or put it in the chat. So there are three main questions that the digital journalist is always considering in the background of their work. First up, the digital news experience. Who and where is the audience? When we produce content, we have to think about all the different ways in which the audience might be consuming our news. Who these people are, where they might be, on what device, what time of day, what day of the week. The experience of consuming our content can vary according to all of these factors. And if we don't take these factors into consideration, the danger is that we will fail to serve a segment of our audience and our journalism won't reach as many people as it should. the behavior of digital news consumers. As much as we would like them to, we cannot expect audiences to consume our content the way we would like them to consume it. Not everyone is going to read an article line by line until the end of the story, not unless we understand their behavior and make it easy or tempting for them to do so. We know that our content is not only competing with other news outlets who are covering the same stories, but also with other kinds of content altogether, even other kind of apps or online activities. So we have to present our work in a way that gives it the best possible chance of rising to the top of their attention and keeping them engaged. And then, of course, there's the rapidly changing media landscape. Think about how little media consumption patterns changed prior to the internet and how much they have changed since then. Think about mobile internet speeds and how much easier it is to stream video now. Think about the evolution of the written article and how many different phases that's gone through. Think about the different ways in which social media has influenced the way we work and the way audiences access the news. A digital-first journalist has to be aware of these dynamics as much as possible with their audience. For instance, just to give you an example, the way we do our digital videos these days has changed. It used to be the old way of doing it. It used to be to put some music on it, put some text on screen, and that was quite a generic way that we would do our digital videos at CNN. These days, we're much more likely to put a script on it, still with subtitles on there, but to script pieces, to produce original content for digital that might even not appear on TV. So we're much more focused on digital video. There's less of a generic way of producing it. And that's really what the audiences are asking us to do. So we have to be ready to change with our audiences as their habits do so as well. So let's take a look at all the different formats that we have at CNN on our digital platforms. It's taking the content that we put on TV and finding ways to make that relevant for a digital audience. So there may well be this very, very strong report out there from Clarissa Ward, say, but is there a better way to present that for our digital audiences other than just uploading the full report? Could we break that report up, take out key moments of it, perhaps embed them in a write that Clarissa herself has written? So it's just trying to think about how can we take the content that we're producing and make it relevant to each audience. Interactives are something that we're going to talk about a little bit later. And it's something that many news outlets are doing now, partly because they're a memorable experience for audiences, which is important in a competitive news market. And CNN also has a growing number of podcasts and newsletters, which have a growing audience, particularly among our podcasts. And now podcasts are evolving as well, more and more into video podcasts. That's kind of the next thing. And if you go onto something like Spotify podcasts, you'll now see that you've got an option to turn the video on, so you can watch it as well as listening to it. So podcasts are a growing part of our output these days when it comes to digital. Let's take a little look at digital news writing and some fundamentals when it comes to that. First thing to say is, again, the written article is still the main way that digital news consumers get their news. Despite all the innovation in platform technology and all the creativity going into how to present content, the traditional written article with the inverted pyramid structure is still king. it's still what audiences expect to find when they come to our website to consume the news. In journalism, the inverted pyramid refers to a story structure where the most important information, or what might be considered to be the conclusion, is presented first. It's right at the top. The who, what, when, where, and why appear at the start of the story, followed by supporting details and background information. This writing style is different than, for example, academic writing, where an abstract may summarize the main findings, but the content typically focuses first on the details, leading to the conclusion which appears at the end of the article. Having said that, there are ways in which online writing can and should differ from traditional print journalism. Studies show that our audiences do a lot of scanning and skimming text for the information they are looking for. They've clicked on your article, but they still need a reason to stick around. So they scroll around for clues and cues to confirm whether this is really what they want to watch or read. So writers should find ways to make that process as effortless as possible. Think of the density of text in a book or academic paper. There is a lot of text on the internet that follows this kind of format, but that's not how a digital journal should work at all. With online news, you need to break it up your text as much as possible. Use short paragraphs, even single sentence paragraphs. The space that creates around the writing will help the reader find what they're looking for. You also don't want dense text, long paragraphs to hold up the scrolling speed of the user, who, don't forget, is playing a very active role in moving through even the experience of reading an article. You hold them up, you're more likely to lose them. Another way to break up your head is to use subheads and bullet points. Again, these are aids for the reader who skims and scans an article before deciding whether they want to read more deeply. Digital journalists need to accept and respect the fact that users are often consuming the news on the move or between other tasks. Many of them will only spend clicking away. Don't hold that against them. They have busy lives. Help them as much as possible to get something from the page before they move on. Perhaps they'll spend more time with you next time. And I don't know about you, but I like to see links in the articles I read. Even if I don't click on them, I get the sense that that information I'm taking in is connected to other sources, and that all adds up. It's part of transparency in journalism too, to show where a journalist is getting their information from. So if you reference a research paper, piece of journalism elsewhere on your site, add a link so that the audience can see how you've connected the dots. And embeds, it's common to see them from social media, breaking up the text, which is a good thing, as we've said, but don't let that be a substitute for good writing that makes the content meaningful. I want to demonstrate this by taking a quick look at our site today. So I'm going to stop sharing and just bring up Google for you. And we can just take one article and show this in action. Let me just get rid of... Okay, it's not going to let me do it, but I'm going to just try to lose the ad at the top, but it's a stubborn one today. So anyway, here is our website. Sometimes if you scroll up and down, oh, there we go. No, it's going to stay there. Anyway, this is our website today. As you can see, we have our top story, our live updates, video from our TV broadcasts, and particularly around what we've decided is our top story online today. We can see it's basically about upcoming President-elect Trump's picks for his cabinet. We've got video here. We've got other articles. We've got analysis and various other stories connected to this, with other stories, more global stories here on the right-hand side of the page, particularly as it comes to Ukraine. But let's just take this story, for example. This is a normal digital write. So it includes the headline right at the top here, We obviously have pictures. Pictures are still important on here. But just take a look at the text here. And what I want you to concentrate on is how much white there is on the screen here. There's a whole chunk of white here. There's a whole chunk of white here. Got adverts and everything here. But there's a lot of white here. It's broken up a lot. The first line, just a paragraph long, short. This is your lead, if you like, the line that you're using to try and get your audiences interested in the story. Normally, what we call the nut graph, the story in a nutshell, if you like, goes second. And this will be the who, where, when, what, why, how of the story. So it's usually up pretty high in the story. And then the rest of the story flows on from there. But as you can see, it's fairly broken up. As I mentioned before, there are subheads, so that if someone suddenly comes to this story, they can quickly scroll up and down and see what this story is covering. So it's broken up, it's got subheads, pictures, so you really know quickly what you're going to get with this story. So and it's also got links as well, as I mentioned before. So this is a good piece of digital writing here. It's broken up with various elements. There are links, including right on the first line and the second paragraph as well. It's got the top line. It's got the who, what, when, why, who, what, when, why, the 5 W's and the how as well. And it's broken up into various sections, which are clearly highlighted. So anyone coming to this section would know what they're going to get before they decide to spend the time to actually read it. Before we move on, any questions about what I've covered so far, particularly when it comes to digital writing? Let's move on to digital video then, which I mentioned is another big part of what we do here at CNN. Now, this graph is a few years old now, so this may have changed a bit since it was produced. But the one reason why I want to show you this graph is it's really important to pay attention to